So I always tell writers that you have to be really careful with the first words that you put in your screenplay because they will often put a first impression in the reader's mind that they won't be able to shake as they get further into your project. And suddenly I got really self-conscious thinking, oh God, what kind of first impression am I making with these little teasers? Hello, my screenwriting friends, and welcome to another episode of The Feedback Loop. This is the free weekly deep dive screenwriting feedback series where each week we look at the first 3 pages of a different writer's script from the producer's perspective. I go through it word by word, page by page to show you what's working, what's maybe not working. The writer is on the call with us, so if something's not working, we can discuss their intentions and see if we can't figure out some tips or techniques or strategies to try to make it land more effectively the way they intend it to. My name is Jeff Ballo. I spent many years as a frustrated would-be independent producer searching for material to produce when I couldn't find anything viable. I went down this crazy rabbit hole of trying to teach writers how to write stuff that capture what's in their head and present it not just as a screenplay, but as a screenplay that a producer could actually say yes to. To be clear about this, I don't believe that you should write for the producer. I don't believe that you should look for the market and go, I'm going to write that because I think I can sell that. I really believe that the best stories and the best screenplays tap into something emotional, tap into something personal, tell some sort of story that you're passionate about. If you can really tap into your passion, if you can really tap into those stories that you want to be telling, you're going to tell them more compellingly. Is that a word? I think that's a word. You're going to tell them in a way that will leap off the page more effectively, as long as you learn the skills and the techniques and how to actually master this craft. So to that end, today we're going to look at 3 pages, the first 3, from a writer based in California by the name of Debbie Castanha. I believe that's how we pronounce her name. She has a script called Cowboy and California that she has called a drama western romance. So we'll talk to Debbie about her genre classification, and of course we'll talk about the rest of her pages as well. Now, Debbie's first 3 pages, I'm excited to share these with you because the first 3 pages really are a nice little setup, but I wasn't quite sure when I read them which way the story was going to go. So as I started thinking about what I would say about those pages, I realized I probably needed a few more pages. So I asked for the next 7 pages and read the first 10 pages, which actually put quite a different spin on what those first 3 pages were. Now, the reason I look in this series at the first 3 pages is because we don't need context. We don't need background information. If I was to give feedback on, say, the final scene of a writer's script or the scene of your choosing, that's not necessarily, I can't necessarily give you solid objective feedback on those pages because so many factors come into play as to what you've set up to know whether or not that scene is working or is effective in context. So by starting with the first 3 pages, there is no background setup. This is establishing the situation, so we can really finally look at the details of the writing, your writing style, how you're presenting those words on the page. So now when we're finished talking with Debbie today about her screenplay, then we're going to look at the first 3 pages of a familiar script. And today we're going to have a look at the first 3 pages from the indie classic 500 Days of Summer. Now, I love this as a romantic comedy drama, romantic dramedy. It's the kind of story that a lot of writers will be writing in the early days of their career, or for the indie market, at least, anyway. And so, therefore, it might be the kind of story that a lot of writers watching this would be interested in writing. It's a personal story. It's something that is clearly the writer's passionate about and taps into maybe their own experience, or it's the kind of movie that's written because the writer and the creative team is passionate about it. and not necessarily writing that story because they think there's some market to reach for. So hopefully that makes sense. Sit back, enjoy, grab something to drink and something to take notes with, and enjoy this episode of The Feedback Loop. Super, 1997, somewhere in Montana. Exterior overlook, day. A brilliant blue sky broken only by massive cumulus clouds. On a rise above the majestic valley, a beat-up pickup is parked in the dirt off the road. A river snakes along the lush valley floor below. Purple lupine blanket the meadow. An unseen hawk screeches. It's God's country. Interior exterior pickup. Voices mingle as a young man and woman make out. Sweating beer can and brown felt cowboy hat on the pickup's dashboard. He speaks playfully. Happy. I love that smell. Will, known as Happy, 24, Prince Charming in blue jeans with an easy, practiced smile, nuzzles girlfriend, 22, fresh face off a butter advertisement, her accent country fried. Girlfriend, you mean my scent? Happy, yeah, that scent's about as good as horse shit, and you know how I love that scent. She stops, frowns, pouts, folds her arms in mock anger. Girlfriend, Hap, that is not funny, and you didn't say one word about my new dress. He kisses her neck, distracted, deaf not looking at her dress. Happy. Shit, yeah, I love that dress. Why don't you take it off so I can get a closer look? Girlfriend giggles, and they resume making out. Out the rearview mirror, Hap sees dust devils from the dirt lot as an approaching car pulls in and parks. Happy continued, now who the hell's that? He swigs the last of the beer, crushes and drops the can, narrows his eyes at the plates on the back of the vehicle. California. He grabs his hat from the dash, steps out. Happy continued, just hang on now, don't move one pretty muscle. Exterior overlook, day. Hap saunters to the car, speaks casually to the open window to the ball cap wearing driver. Happy, California, good luck getting where you're going, 'cause he sinks to his knees to be eye to eye. Flustered, his words fade as the driver pulls off her ball cap, releasing a cascade of dirty blonde hair. Happy continued, 'cause it looks like you're on your way to a flat. Sierra, 22, serious, probing eyes, studies him with an expression that doesn't invite a smile. So he doesn't, his face less self-assured without it. His eyes float inside the car, which screams road trip, boxes, books, cameras, food, all kinds of crap. Sierra reaches in a cooler on the floor, pulls out a water bottle, holds it to the back of her neck. She looks up to his face, shaded by the dusty cowboy hat. Sierra, believe me, cowboy, the last thing I want is to get stuck in this wasteland. He frowns with irritation, looks to the breathtaking vista offered by the overlook, and back at her. Happy. There's air at the station in about 2 miles. Last chance for almost 100 miles. She wipes sweat from her face, opens the chilled bottle, stares at him directly, probing, unself-conscious as hell. Happy continued, you know you're kind of staring. Sierra, I'm memorizing your face. Sierra takes a swig, her eyes not leaving his face. Sierra continued, you never know, this memory, she shrugs, barely perceptibly, twirls a strand of hair. Sierra, might have to last the rest of my life. Hap's confused, maybe uncomfortable, and clearly not used to the feeling, as an impatient voice calls from the pickup. Girlfriend off screen. Hap, come on, what you doing? He looks at the pickup, back to Sierra in front of him. Sierra, looks like you better get back to business. Happy, yeah, well, better get that tire looked at. Sierra, see ya, cowboy. They lock eyes for a moment before she drives off. Hap watches the car, turns back to his pickup. Exterior highway, evening. Sierra speeds along the tall grasslands, turns into... And those are the first 3 pages. So we're going to talk about these pages today. The very first thing that I want to say is one of the first things I want to talk about is along with these pages came a custom font for the title page. Now, this is not really a problem, and you're going to see this on professional scripts. Once they actually turn it into a movie and the art department gets involved and they create this big fancy title, they're going to create the big fancy title for their page. And yes, Kay, I agree. This is pretty. The The problem is when we're writing a script, the one thing that you want to understand is that people are reading script after script after script after script. Anything that jumps out like this is kind of like this is an enormous flourish. And the argument that I always make is that if you can tell your whole story and paint all your pictures just using that one standard font, you're basically painting on an empty canvas. Once you start to do a big flourish like this, you're sort of directing us which way to think, which way to look. And it doesn't allow our imagination to sort of fully go in the direction that it perhaps could go. So if you imagine the reader reading script after script after script, and then all of a sudden there's this giant flourish of this title, it can be kind of distracting. Now, the purists are going to say, don't ever do this. And I'm not necessarily one of those purists. If it works, it's fine. But one of the challenges that I have is when I read this font, I see Old Wild West. I don't just see a Western style thing. I'm thinking like 1800s Old Wild West. Now the problem is, once I start reading the script, that's not actually what this story is. So whenever you use a custom font, you run the risk of putting my imagination in the wrong place. And as the writer, your goal is always going to be to make sure that my mind is going wherever the picture you're painting is taking me. And you do that more effectively, I would argue, by just using the straight font, because then your words do all the talking, not your graphic design, which may or may not be in sync with what you're trying to do. So, not a big deal. Please don't worry too much about that. The overriding thing is, when I first read this, not knowing what the genre was, simply just reading the pages themselves, I gotta be honest, after I saw that title, I started reading this expecting something sinister to happen. I was sort of expecting that there was going to be another layer going on here that was when Sierra pulls up in her car and we see that the guy gets out. Notice that the character is called Girlfriend, right? She doesn't actually have a name, which is fine. I get what you're trying to do there, but because she's called Girlfriend, and then he gets sort of pulled away from this almost like teen movie style makeout scene, and then she's got this sort of piercing thing where she's staring, and then she's memorizing his face. I'm immediately going, uh-oh, is she about to kill him? Right? Like, I'm thinking, what kind of twisted stuff am I in for now? Now, I got to say, when I get to the end here, I want to know what happens next, because I'm thinking, is she setting up this really wicked thing going on, right? So I would argue that largely happened because the title and the font used in the title made me think that we were covering something up. So here's the thing. If you imagine reading screenplays all the time and they're always in the title's always in that standard font, all caps, underlined, right? That's the way titles are done. And then you have this big flourish of a title. Now, as a reader reading scripts, I'm going to look at that big flourish of a title and think, was this a deliberate choice? Is this a deliberate choice to make me think you're playing with my expectations of screenwriting? Now, this may seem very meta, but when you read enough scripts, you start thinking that way. And so then you start thinking meta, and then that meta affects how you read what you read, right? So the opening of this is great. I absolutely love this first section. It's just a beautiful a simple setup. It's maybe a little over descriptive, but really not too over descriptive. Ends with a solid, it's God's country. I know where I am. Bang, I have a picture of that. Then we're into the pickup truck, and we're seeing this kind of funny, kind of cute little scene unfold. The car pulls up, but then because of that setup, my mind starts going off in a different direction, which the script never does, and which, after discussing with Debbie, who we're going to bring on in just a second here, is not the way that Debbie's going with the story. So the subtlest thing can change the way the reader interprets what they're reading, and it can affect the reader's understanding of everything else that follows. So let me go ahead and without going on an endless monologue, why don't we get Debbie on here and say hi. So Fernando, the question is, by the way, what is the standard font for a screenplay title? Same as the rest of the whole script. Courier 12-point font, always and only. Okay, so unmute. Hello, Debbie. How are you feeling? Debbie's sick.
I'm good. Hi, Jeff. Hi.
I hope you're feeling okay. I hope. Tell me how it feels to have someone read through your pages.
Well, I was kind of shocked that this isn't my most current version, because a couple of words I'd modified already. I'm just shocked I would have sent you a version that wasn't my most current.
What sort of things have changed?
Well, for instance, I kind of tightened up that very beginning. So it just says bluebells cover the hillside instead of purple lupine blanket the meadow. Okay. And I got rid of I just kind of tightened that up. Mm-hmm. But I massaged these pages for a long time. And also I gave some more description about the stuff in her car. I said something like fat scholarly books, just a couple little details. But anyhow, I was kind of embarrassed to realize that I had done that. But it felt good to have somebody read my papers, finally.
Okay. It wasn't too stressful or nausea-inducing. Okay, so so how do you feel about what I said about how my mind was going to what there might be a sinister underbelly to the scene?
Well, I was kind of shocked because I never ever would have thought that. So I'm really pleased to know that. But I figured out because I kind of thought, this shows romance and Western and kind of a classic feel, and I loved the look of the font. So it never occurred to me that somebody would read into it like you did. So I'm glad to hear that.
Okay. So now, so as far as the story goes, so one of the things that I do want to say is what I do really like about it is that the writing is pretty crisp and it's pretty simple. The images are clear. It's unfolding nicely. I will say that there's a fair bit of description going on, and the description is maybe slowing things down a bit. So, I think you've been watching the previous sessions as well. But the general idea, as you know, is 1 page equals 1 minute. So the read should take about a minute for each page as well. So the more detail you pack in there, I know that you think it's important for us to understand the scene, but what we really want is to condense it a little bit more, to find the things in the character actions and in what's happening within the scene that give us those details rather than the description of the details. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I do think that in my more late versions of this, I did kind of tighten out some of those descriptions. For instance, I removed her accent country fried. I mean, just little things, but I did start to understand that I was
it's funny. That's actually one I didn't mind too much, and I'll tell you why I didn't mind that too much is because you're using you're crossing senses. One of the things that's always going to help you as writers, this goes for everyone, is if you can include sensory information within your writing, it becomes a more tangible experience for the reader. So when you're describing a scene, if you just say, flowers dot the landscape, it's like, oh, okay, I can see the pretty picture. But if within the language there's something aromatic about it, I don't know what the word choice would be off the top of my head, but you know what I mean? If you can invoke the sense of smell within that same length description, it's going to be more real, because we're gonna feel multiple senses at the same time. So that's sort of a little secret to more effective writing, I would say. So that's why I like her accent, which country fried is I'm picturing chicken, right? The smell and the flavor of chicken, which ascribed to an accent is kind of a nice little, I get it more. It's more viscerally connecting, I would say. So not that you have to keep it. If you found it better without it, then that's fine too. But that's the kind of little detail that I do think it helps writing in general.
And then Jeff, one other thing I did change that's fairly significant is I actually changed character name from Happy to his real name, which is Will.
Okay, so because when I asked you, I sent a request for the first 10 pages so I could see where it goes from here.
Yes.
And I noticed that in those pages, the character name was different.
Yes, so, because I'm going to go into the future when he no longer goes by the nickname of Happy. So I went through the whole document and changed it to Will. So even though he's called Happy as a nickname and she calls him Cowboy as a nickname, his name is Will in all the pages.
Okay, so I would say that in reading that version where the name was Will, but he was continuously called Happy throughout the scene, was disorienting. So ironically, this may be more effective in that regard, right?
Okay.
I guess the thing to always keep in mind, and it's so hard to do that balance, and I understand that the balance is a tricky thing, but the thing to always understand, and I know you've heard me say this already, but the reader, when they're reading your pages, don't know what the hell's going on. So anything that you think we need to understand to make sense of the logistics of the story later has to take second seat to what's going to be clear and fluid in this moment now, right? So the early pages are going to flow more effectively if the names jibe, right? If the names are the same in the scene. Yes, maybe later it makes sense to have called him Will from the beginning, but we can maybe transition somewhere along the way when it's logical and clear to do so. That's going to probably be more effective than jumbling those two. And I got to go, why do they keep calling him Happy? Why isn't the writer calling him Happy? That's what I was thinking on the other pages. Yeah.
Great. Yes, I understand. That's really good advice.
Yeah. So the other thing that I noticed is that I like the dialogue. I think the dialogue's pretty good. I hear the accents and the way that you've written it, and yet it's not, disparaging. Often when we write an accent where somebody has the, sort of a abbreviated or colloquial way of talking, it's very easy to write it in a way that you're not mocking the accent, but it comes out like hillbilly-ish, for lack of a better way to put it, and it doesn't come across that way. So this is really solid way of doing that. That's respectful to the characters and respectful to their location. So I'm happy with the dialogue. I think you have a lot of blocking, a lot of people looking this way or seeing that or spotting this, which generally speaking, we want the screenplay to be as clean as possible, right? So generally we're not going to want too much in the way of blocking and actor looks here, actor turns there, actor notices this, right? If we can evoke those things through the back and forth dialogue, that's going to be much more powerful in a screenplay than taking that moment to stop and just show. Because think about this: camera blocking or character blocking, like where the characters are turned, or they turn this way, or they glance like that. That line is not actually moving the story forward, right? That line is helping the reader see how you're shooting the scene, if that makes sense. So when you have things like she stops, frowns, pouts, folds her arm in mock anger, this is all fine. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with it, but I would argue you could probably find 3 or maybe 4 words tops right here that says the same thing without giving us the full action, right? She pouts. Is that all? That's probably all we need. Or she pouts with a smirk. Done. You know what I mean? Like, does it make sense what I'm saying? It's.
Yes. I went on and on.
It's not too bad, but there are parts that are more there are parts that are have more description than others. You say ball cap wearing driver, and it took me like 3 reads before I went, does she mean a baseball cap? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd say baseball cap because a ball cap wearing is like a weird phrase, right?
Okay.
So think in terms of image order, right? So Hap saunters to the car, speaks casually to the open window to the ball cap wearing driver. No, he's speaking to the driver who is wearing a baseball cap, like image order, right? The first thing we're going to see is a driver who happens to have a cap. We're not going to see a cap with a driver hanging on underneath it, right?
Do I even need to say that it's an open window, or is it understood that he's only going to be talking to somebody if the window's open?
I mean, I think that's a judgment call. Always keep in mind, there's no right or wrong. This is all subjective, and these are my opinions as much as they are. I'm going to try to teach you as much principle or talk about things from a principle standpoint, but ultimately, it's going to be your determination of what's going to be the most effective way to get the idea that you want to get across. All I'm trying to point out is if he speaks casually to the open window, the driver wears a baseball cap. I don't know. I'm not sure how you're going to word this, but my point simply is that when I read it, he speaks casually to the open window. I'm fine to that point. To the ball cap wearing driver, those two images are backwards from the way our brain processes information standpoint, right?
Right.
So because of that, I'm going, what is a ball cap wearing driver? Like, is that a job? Like a ball cap wearer, right? Like, I don't know much about country, right? I'm a city kid, so I'm like, is that a farm thing? I don't know, right? So it's that's what you're going to be thinking of when you go to your word choices,
Okay.
Hey, California, good luck getting where you're going, cuz. I'd break this up a little bit more. Hey, California, right? I'd like separate that. Good luck at where you're going, cuz. I mean, I see what you're saying after I process it because I know later that she's got a flat tire. We didn't see the flat tire, did we? No. There's no flat tire at the beginning. So he reveals that here. Maybe we want to see. You've described this when I followed up and I read the next 6-7 pages of it. You described this as the meet cute of the two central characters. Now, a meet cute is when the two characters who will eventually have a relationship meet, right? And the idea behind the meet cute is that they meet in some cute way because that endears us to them. This isn't really a meet cute per se, right? They're meeting, but he's not helping her. She doesn't need his help. They're kind of they end up in the same place at the same time, right? So aside from this gaze that she gives him, I'm memorizing your face. She's got this confidence that she's looking back at him. We don't really know that that's a connection that they're having, or that she's just kind of like maybe weird, or maybe super intense, or it's intriguing from that standpoint. We want to keep reading, but as far as the two of them meeting and this is their first moment of bonding, I guess, I feel like it needs more. Like the scene needs something specific. If she were to like swerve off the road and like jump out and like, damn it, I've got a flat tire, and then he's going to come over to help, and then they meet. That's a little bit more of the meet cute idea. Mm-hmm. Do you understand? I'm not saying that's what you want to do because it's up to you. But it's like that element is maybe missing from the scene. So if we're looking at it from a purely scene standpoint, I feel like the scene doesn't tell me what I'm supposed to get out of the scene exactly. And I think that's why I kept being suspicious of her or suspicious of the situation. Because if you think about this fact that they're in this kind of, and I don't mean this in any way disparagingly, but it's kind of like a traditional, I would say cliche, but I know that that's a loaded word, but it's this, like, they're making out in the car, right? It's like, it's a makeout scene. Well, in every horror film, we're going to start with the couple in the car that are making out, right? So when she comes along and she's got this weird intense thing, is she going to kill them? Like, even though I found out later that this is a romance, a Western drama, which we'll pinpoint the genre in a second. But once you sort of understand that point, then it's sort of like, well, we actually need a little bit more here. We need these things to be clearer. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So coming back to this line, then he says, "Hey, California, good luck getting where you're going, cuz." And then he sinks down. He sees her pull off her cap. The hair goes flying. And he says, "It looks like you're on your way to a flat." This just from a reader standpoint, this line is hard to read, because "Hey, California," because first of all, he's giving her a nickname based on the license plate. We got to be pretty quick to catch that. Is there a familiarity there? Do they know each other already? Because he's already jumping in with a nickname. But I would probably separate these two ideas. So
I'm gonna tell you that I did in the very next version that I wrote. It says, "Happy, hey California." He sinks to his knees so as to be eye to eye with the driver. Good luck getting where you're going, cuz. And then I went on. So I did recognize that weakness.
Okay, fair enough. Well, so, but just as a thing to remember, not just for this one situation, but always, is that if you build into the scene something maybe a bit more, like that there's that the flat tire is a part of the scene, or that there's some. So, how do I express this? Like, when I read the next several pages, it all goes into we go into the grocery store, and he's with another girl, and he's a smooth talker, and they have another little exchange at the counter, and then she goes to the place where she's, I guess, staying, and then he happens to be working there, and so it's very quick after this that we realize that in some ways all the things that I thought were like, ooh, I want to see where this is going to go, turned out not to be the direction that it's going to go, right? So if I'm thinking this is going to be like, hey, we've got this kind of typical setup, right? This making out in the car. Then this girl comes and she's like provocateur, and then she's got this intensity, and he's maybe in danger, and then, oh no, that's actually the two of them, their first meeting, and they're going to meet again. I feel like we need a little bit more in the story to make the connection work. If you're writing a story that is ultimately a romance, which I think you are, is that right?
Kind of, yeah. I'm a little unsure. It's kind of a drama, but it primarily does have a big romance involved.
But it's really about the relationship of these two characters.
Yeah, it is.
What's the hesitation?
Well, because I have kind of themes of choices we make and free will and some kind of interesting thematic ideas that I kind of want to explore. The romance is kind of a backdrop.
Okay, so fill me in on some of the themes or the ideas that you want to get across, because I think you may be able to find the solution to what I'm talking about within that.
Well, so they're going to have this perfect summer, and then she's going to be looking for greener pastures, and she's going to she's going to end up leaving, and then she's going to regret it, and then she'll come back and she'll wonder if she ever, I don't know.
Did I throw away the best thing that ever happened to me?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so which feeds into kind of what my thinking is, which is that right off the bat, and pretty much what we need to have happen in these first 3 pages is we need to fall in love with these 2 characters right away. Like, we need to feel the way he feels. I'm assuming, is he the central character or is she the central character? Because from here on, it seemed like maybe she is. But from
it's kind of her. I've struggled with that. At first, I thought it was going to be a 2-hander, but I guess it's pretty much going to be her story.
Okay. I would argue that a 2-hander there's always a main character. One of the things that I teach is that there's this idea of the hero, and the hero is actually a construct of 2 components. So the hero is the character that we experience the story through, and whose actions dictate the plot. And you can actually break that down into a main character and a protagonist. So the main character is the character whose eyes we see the story through, and then the protagonist is the character whose actions twist and turn the story. Mm-hmm. So you could actually separate those 2 functions in story, right? So you could have one be one and one be the other. You could, if there are 2 characters, chances are, or love story, one is usually the main character, the audience character, and the other one tends to be the opponent. So it doesn't have to be that way, but I think if it's fuzzy as to who we're supposed to be caring for, it can help you to identify that more clearly as to who is the character, who is the central character. Now, that could shift. You just need to know, at least in each of the scenes, we need to know who's the central character of that scene. That's going to help us. Whereas right now, it sort of feels like it by nature of the fact that you have this last line on the bottom of page 3 where she speeds away, I'm thinking, wait, so she's the central character, right?
Yes, you're right.
Right. So, but we started with him, and it's kind of all told from his standpoint. She's the mysterious stranger. And because she's the mysterious stranger, it's kind of really what his reaction is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's odd that we're following her next, I guess is my point. Not necessarily a problem, but from a writing standpoint and making sure that it's going to land the way that you want it to land, I think it's going to help you to be super clear on that. And to understand that the changing point of view from the reader's standpoint is plays into what our expectations are, right? So if you shift point of view and it throws me off and I go, wait, what's going on now? That is going to disconnect me from the action that's happening. It's going to make it harder for them to ultimately maybe connect with the story and with the characters, right?
What if I had started with just her driving down the highway and pulling in, and then
maybe, but I'm not necessarily suggesting that you have to do that. I think more importantly, what I'm suggesting is that if we're going to shift, it needs to be very clear when we end this scene that it's her, that we're switching to her focus somewhere in here. You know what I mean? It's all written from his point of view. Mm-hmm. You can shift perspective by halfway through changing it so that you're writing from her point of view, what she's seeing, how she's looking out the window at him. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a subtle thing. Make sense?
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking it sounds hard, but I'm going to try to figure that out.
So I think part of the challenge is that this is maybe a bigger fix than just fixing this scene, but I'm giving you ideas in relation to just fixing this scene, right? So part of the problem is when I read the next 7 pages or so, I'm starting to see that we just go straight into, the next scene is I think at Walmart, and it's in the they're grocery shopping, and then there's a mother and her toddler runs off, and that toddler runs past him with another girl in the aisle. They're in the condom aisle, and it's sort of like it felt disconnected from what you'd set up a little bit, right? So we had this grand opening, this beautiful, like, God's country. Here we are. This is something that's going to be majestic. And then we go into kind of a possible horror film opening, right? I'm not sure, but that's not the way you meant it, and I certainly don't mean that disparagingly. But we're going into the makeout scene, which is funny in itself, by the way. I do like the scene. I'm just telling you what I'm thinking as I'm reading it. And then she comes in.
If you hadn't seen my title page, you wouldn't have thought horror at all.
I don't know. I can't tell you that. This is part of the challenge, is that the reader's only ever going to be able to see your pages for the first time once. And so whatever reaction they have, whatever hesitation they have, whatever problems or confusions they have, that's it. That's the experience for them. Do you see what I mean? Which is why this is why, in my opinion, this is much more challenging than most people imagine, because you're not thinking through how subtle those responses are going to be and how they're going to change it. I can't tell you if it was just a standard, cowboy in California, or California and cowboy. I always get it wrong. Cowboy in California. And then we go straight into this. If I didn't see the font, I don't know, because I wouldn't have I wouldn't be thinking it's a Western necessarily, because this might have jumped out at me more, that it's 1997. This kind of gets glossed over because I already keep in mind, when the way the human brain works, when we get a little piece of information, we form a picture. We form a bigger picture than just the piece of information. And then the next piece of information comes along, and it changes the shape of our picture, and it changes the shape of our picture more, and it gets with writing, it's going to get clearer and become more where you're going. But the reader's always 3 steps ahead of you. They're always imagining forward, right? So the challenge with writing is that you want to make sure that you put the pictures that send them forward in the direction you want them to go. So you want them to be, so for example, now knowing what you know, it's possible you could play with the idea that we're thinking this is a horror film, right? Like you could throw something in over here that twists that a little. I'm not saying you want to do that, but that's the thinking that's going to make writing that really truly stands out from the pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenging thing to do, and the way to see it, the way to understand it, is to always remember that the reader doesn't know anything about the story. They're completely blank slate. So literally every word and the way the words are presented are painting a picture. If you write something epic like "It's God's Country," that's a pretty epic statement. I loved it. I thought, bang! I have a picture. This is Big Sky, Montana. This is gonna be big. And then we sort of go into Walmart and we see sort of smaller stuff. It feels a little bit disconnected in a way. So either this can be changed to be something a little bit more in line with what the scope of the story that you've written is, or we need to include something that's maybe a little bit bigger themed and more epic thing, which I think is what you're trying to go for. Right?
Yeah. Actually, the setting is really important. The Wild West. Montana is just spectacularly beautiful, and I kind of want it to be a character of sorts in this romance drama. So that's why I called it a Western. Even there will be cowboys, and there will be some cows, and there will be scenes that are pastoral, but it's it's not like a traditional Western. So I probably shouldn't have called it that, but it's not just like some city drama romance.
Right. It's not just a romantic drama.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. The West and this beautiful setting is really important to the story.
Well, so this is why I had asked for more pages, because from the first 3 pages, we certainly have, we have something to talk about in regard to that. With the pages that follow, because you're going for what you're describing here, and I can see that you're going for that, but the size of the scenes, right? The epicness of the scenes, you're not really, you're playing against that in some way. So you go into I don't have them pulled up at the moment, but you go into the very next scene. We're in the condom aisle basically, and he's with another girl, and there's lots of sexual innuendo, and it's very. I get what you're trying to do, because you're trying to show that he's this sort of smooth talker or whatever. There's a point at which, I don't know why, but there's a point at which the ranch hand guy, the older guy, sorry to everybody else who hasn't read those other pages, but he says fuck at one point. It was just so out of place to me. Like, it didn't seem in sync with what you were. The innuendo was funny, but kind of childish, if you know, it was almost like teen comedy rather than, or like teen romancy rather than building something more epic. And so you can have the same kind of thing where he's flirting with her and whatever, but if you get into the lurid stuff, it's going to play against the larger themes that I think you're probably aiming for. Does that make sense?
Well, I should say it totally would be a rated R. There is sex, there is language, and it is, it's a mature sorts of themes. It will get darker. I think you might, you might know some of how dark it gets, but in the very beginning, yes, it goes from this beautiful outdoor setting, and then quickly we're in Walmart, and there's a reason, because you have this girl who's just does not fit in. She doesn't like this community. So, it's really beautiful and epic, and yet she's going to feel really pinned in and feel like everything is very small, and she's never going to feel very comfortable in the setting until she'll come back later.
Okay.
So there's reasons for, I think, some of those choices, whether or not they worked,
Well, no. So the challenge that we have and is that there's always, I know there's always reasons behind it, but the challenge that we have is that everything has to work together, right? So what you're describing, and having read those pages, they're not connecting so far, and I'm seeing what I think you're going for, and I'm seeing how I think you're going for it, and I feel like the scenes aren't guiding me in that direction. I felt maybe in the first, to page 7 or 8 or even 10, I sort of felt like we were maybe going into like a Hallmark movie kind of a thing, right? So, but dark, but more adult, right? So I'm not going to blush from sex scenes and crude language. So that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is making sure that it's organic to the theme that you're reaching for. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I don't, it's hard because, as soon as we start talking about other pages, and this is the challenge of giving feedback as well, particularly the first 3 pages, because the first 3 pages may say one thing and then the next X number of pages go off in different direction. There's different notes to be had. So with all feedback, I can talk about a million different things with them. I want to make sure that we get you some, valuable feedback that's going to help you, and not sort of just, talk in circles about things that aren't maybe material, right? So if you've already addressed some of the things that we're talking about, I want to still make sure that that this session is helpful to you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
just that challenge basically. So I guess coming back to these initial first 3 pages, I like your style of writing. I think if we had to really simplify and just get down to it, um, be aware that the reader may be going in a different direction in their imagination than what you're writing if you're not careful to see it from a completely blank slate point of view. It's one of the hardest things for all writers to do, is because you know this story so well, you know how every detail here connects with every other detail everywhere else in your story. And so in some ways maybe you can't even see it objectively from a blank slate point of view, because you know what I mean, you're always bringing that wider knowledge to it. It's like me now. If I were to read updated pages, I'm going to know them in the context of what I know here. I'm never going to read them blank again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this was really helpful just to get the idea that people read sinister and horror into these pages, which I couldn't have wanted anything further from that. So I'm going to have to go through it to see what people are how they're reading that.
Yeah. So Metin actually put a question in there as well, that he said he thought it was a possible horror opening as well, even without seeing the title. So I think that's going to be the challenge. Is I can see that it's not. I can see what you're writing, and that once I know it's not, I don't see that in it anymore. Right? The problem is the first time you read it, and this is going to be the time that's going to get your script passed along to somebody else, or it's going to, move up the chain, whatever it is. That first time is the all important time. And so I think your writing style is really engaging. I was with you, and I liked reading it. It was an enjoyable read. When I got to the next pages and it started to go off in a different direction, I was a little less connected to it. But I think the start is solid, and if we can sort of clear up some of that. When you're writing, you're not just writing what you're writing. you're also addressing what is implied or what is even inferred by the reader. You have to contend with that as well. That's a super challenging thing to do. And, if you don't watch horror films, you might not even have a sense that, oh, that is kind of a horror film opening. You know what I mean? Like, how are you going to know that? So this is why I guess feedback gets really important as well. So does that make sense?
Yes, it's all great.
Do you have anything else that you would want to talk about or ask?
I will just quickly ask about the genre, because that was a problem for me, and you mentioned it. So.
Well, so I wouldn't classify it as a Western. A Western is Wild West, right? A Western is just because it has cowboy themes or is set in a dusty old town out in rural Montana or something like that doesn't make it a Western. A Western is very much about a historical gunslingery type of story. So I would probably remove that from your description. Now, as far as, is it a romance or is it a drama? I don't know the story well enough, and I scanned your outline that you had sent, but I don't necessarily want to gauge. You were saying that you're sort of going for like a cross between Bridges of Madison County and Casablanca, right?
Yeah.
Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, because at the end, she's going to make some grand gesture of selflessness, presumably.
Right. Okay. So it may just be a straight drama, and there's nothing wrong with just calling it a drama, If it's a romance, it's really about the romance story itself, and whenever you use a word to describe the genre of your story, you're basically, here's the way I talk about genre. Well, to understand the way I talk about genre, you need to take a step back, and one of my big sort of opinions, perceptions, insights, whatever you want to call it, is that every word you write makes or implies a promise. So it's a promise of something to come. So you're putting an idea in the reader's head that they're anticipating whatever is going to happen. And so either you're going to fulfill that promise, or you're going to exceed that promise, or you're going to break that promise, right? Or you're not going to realize you made that promise and then automatically break it, right? A genre, in my opinion, is like a basket of promises. So if I say I'm writing a horror film, then there are certain expectations that the audience is going to have for what my story had better include. Otherwise, it's going to really disappoint that horror film audience, right? If you have a horror film and there's no scares, there's no blood and guts, maybe, depending on what kind of horror it is. If it's a psychological horror, there's no like mental terror. They're going to be disappointed. Like, that's why you've gone to go see that. So the idea of a genre, as I see it, is this basket of promises, right? So if you're going to create a romance story, that comes with it expectations from the reader. And so the reader's going to want, nay, demand that you fulfill certain things along the way. If your story does, that's cool. But if it doesn't, then it's going to be disappointing no matter how good your story is. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So drama is the safest bet because it doesn't come with all the, all those additional expectations necessarily. But if you can refine it and you can say it's a romance or a horror film or a sci-fi or comedy or whatever it might be, if you can refine it to that level, then you can possibly more effectively connect with the reader because they know more specifically what ride they're in for and whether or not you've achieved it. And if you do satisfy or fulfill or exceed their expectations, then that they're going to connect with it even more, right? A romance that's like, that was a great romance story, is probably going to be more resonant than that was a great drama, right? But yet, if it's a drama, then there are fewer things that you have to make sure that you satisfy. Make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice.
Okay, so So knowing that or thinking in those terms, what would you say the genre would be?
Drama.
Just straight drama, you think? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think based on the outline you sent me and based upon what you're trying to do, I think there's certainly a lot of potential there. I think if you can figure out how to make the scope of it work in sync with the detail of it, that's a big one from having read the other pages. I think that's a big thing to maybe focus on. But the writing style is good and interesting, and I think it's an enjoyable read.
Hey, one last question, if I could.
Describing too much, yes.
Casablanca. How would you call that? Would you call that a drama?
I'm not sure. Probably, I would just probably call it a drama. But
Okay.
it's a period drama as well. You could call it war drama, maybe. I think genre is very much a subjective label a lot of times. I don't think a movie like you wouldn't call Casablanca a genre film. When something is a genre film, it is embodied. It's an embodiment of or embodied by the genre, right? A movie that isn't a genre film specifically, and I don't think Casablanca would be. I think so as such, you'd just sort of revert to calling it a drama, or I would anyway.
Great. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks for sharing your pages, by the way. It's always a little bit unnerving to do so. We really appreciate it. Thank you for that. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that it's really hard to. This is one of the challenges I think most writers don't fully appreciate, which is, that the subtlety of the reader experience is much more complex than it might appear on the surface. Most people think, or most new writers, I would say, and I wouldn't classify, I should have asked, hey, Debbie, if you're still on, how new a writer are you? How long have you been at this? I would not assume that Debbie is a new writer. I would assume that she's been doing this for a few years and this is probably not her first attempt at a script, and I think she's put some effort. There you go. She's been writing for 6 years. So this is the reality. Is what I have found in reviewing projects that come in is that you have the obvious beginners, the people who have sort of gone out, they bought the script writing software, they knocked out something and they sent it in, and they're making so many very obvious, I don't want to say mistakes, but they're not creating material that is designed to connect with reader. But then you have the next level of writers who are what I would generally refer to as intermediate level writers, which is the people who've written a number of scripts. They've been at it for a couple of years. They've been trying to really, they've seen the complexity of it. They're trying to continuously improve. And the challenge is when you get to that place, you sort of know the rules, you sort of know how a script has to be presented, and then you run into what are really the real challenges, because how to format a script and the language of the script and how to make it flow. I mean, you can read other screenplays and get a sense of a lot of that stuff, but the real challenge comes in taking a 2-hour story and maintaining audience interest throughout, and making sure to set things up and pay things off in an organic and fluid and dynamic way, in a way that's pulling the reader through and giving them an experience that they're really enjoying as they're reading, and that is serving your themes and is all internally consistent. I mean, there's a lot of complexity to it, and I think if there's one thing that holds writers back from actually getting where they're trying to go and actually connecting with the producer or opening those doors and getting that agent or any of that kind of stuff, I think it's that they plateau, that they so often, and I'm not saying that this is the case for Debbie, but I would say that in general, in the countless scripts that I've read along the way, I find that intermediate level writers tend to plateau at a certain place, and it's fully appreciating the complexity of it, fully grasping this dynamic setup payoff nature of storytelling, and the experience of the reader themselves. I think if you can put yourself in that headspace and always remember that as a writer, you're creating a reader experience. You're not just writing what we're going to go out and film. You need the reader to experience what you've imagined, right? So when the two characters meet and they have that spark of connection, we want to feel it. We want to be like, yeah, man, that's those. Let's see where this goes, right? Like, if we're just reading it and going, okay, no, I see what's happening here, we're kind of emotionally disconnected from that situation, and it's not. That's going to be the difference between the script that gets recommended, the script that opens the doors, and the 99 that don't. Is that tangible, visceral thing, and it's more than just the language you use, and it's more than just the rules of slug lines and action lines and just dialogue and all that. It really is a story that works, and an experience and a read that is enjoyable and pulls us right through. So, wow, I went off on my little soapbox tangent there. I got more of those to come. I'm an endless source of soapbox tangents. Okay, so let's have a look at the first 3 pages of 500 Days of Summer. Now, this is an independent film. You know what? I didn't even look up what year it was and all that, but I think it's 2009, I want to say, the year that it came out. I'm not sure. But what I have is an early draft of it, apparently. Ironically, the first 3 pages of what I'm about to show you they make a really interesting point. And then I'm going to read a little bit more and you'll see why in just a second. But this is a nice example of always remembering that the reader, your job is to engage the reader. Your job is to surprise the reader. Your job is to bring the reader into the story world that you're creating. And you can do that in a lot of different ways, some of which break the rules, but only break the rules when you understand the rules and you know how to do them effectively. All right, without further ado, let me jump over to the 500 Days of Summer pages. It starts off a full page that says, "Note, the following is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to persons living or dead is purely coincidental." And then the next page says, "Especially you, Jenny Beckman." And then the next page says, "Bitch." Oh, I loved that when I read that. So those are not really the first, they are the first 3 pages of the script, but let's read the first 3 pages, the proper 3 pages of the script. Simple black on white credits roll to big stars, "I'm in love with a girl." When all is said and done, up come a single number in parentheses, like so, 478. Exterior park, day. For a few seconds, we watch a man, 20s, and a woman, 20s, on a park bench. Their names are Tom and Summer. Neither one says a word. Close on her hand, covering his. Notice the wedding ring. No words are spoken. Tom looks at her the way every woman wants to be looked at. A distinguished voice begins to speak to us. Narrator. This is the story of Boy Meets Girl. Cut to number 1. Interior conference room, day. The boy is Tom Hansen. He sits at a very long rectangular conference table. The walls are lined with framed blow-up size greeting cards. Tom, dark hair and blue eyes, wears a t-shirt under his sports coat and Adidas tennis shoes to balance out the corporate dress code. He looks pretty bored. Narrator. The boy, Tom Hansen of Margate, New Jersey, grew up believing that he'd never truly be happy until the day he met his soulmate. Cut to interior living room, 1989. Preteen Tom sits alone on his bed engrossed in a movie. His walls are covered in posters of obscure brands. From the TV, we hear, "Elaine, Elaine." Narrator. This belief stemmed from early exposure to sad British pop music and a total misreading of the movie The Graduate. Cut to interior office cubicle, present day. The girl is Summer Finn. She files folders and answers phones in a plain white office. She has cropped blonde hair almost like a boy's, but her face is feminine and pretty enough to get away with it. Narrator. The girl, Summer Finn of Shinnecock, Michigan, did not share this belief. Cut to interior bathroom, 1994. Teenage Summer stares at herself in the mirror. Her hair extends down to her lower back. Narrator. Since the disintegration of her parents' marriage, she'd only loved 2 things. The first was her long blonde hair. She picks up scissors from the counter and begins to slice. Narrator. The second was how easily she could cut it off and feel nothing. Cut to split screen, interior boardroom, interior cubicle, same. On the right side of the screen, Tom continues to listen to some boring presentation. On the left, Summer answers a call, takes a message, and walks out of her cubicle down a long, narrow hallway. Narrator. Tom meets Summer on January 8th in a San Francisco office building. In an instant, he will know she is the one he's been looking for. Close up Summer opening the door to the boardroom, about to come face to face with Tom for the first time. This is the story of Boy Meets Girl. But before they do, cut to black. Narrator. You should know up front, this is not a love story. Number 240. Exterior streets of San Fran, night. A 12-year-old girl rides her bicycle down the block. She arrives at an apartment complex, jumps off the bike and races up the front stairs. She rings the doorbell. Interior, Tom's place, later. Paul and Mackenzie open the door. These are Tom's best friends since birth. Paul is a doctor and wears hospital scrubs. Mackenzie works in the cubicle next to Tom. Paul, I didn't know who else to call. The girl removes her bike helmet. Girl, you did the right thing. Where is he? Tom is in the kitchen breaking things and basically going insane, about to smash a plate on the floor. He's interrupted by... And that's the end of the first 3 pages. Now, obviously we do a couple of things that I always suggest you not do. We introduce Tom's best friends since birth. Okay, fair enough, but he wears hospital scrubs. He's a doctor. She works in the cubicle next to him. It's not really something we can see here at the moment, but whatever. The cleverness of the idea, which these are going to be references to the days in their relationship. 500 days of summer. Her name is Summer. And there are 500 days, his 500 days with her. I think what I love about this is it violates this notion of no voiceover narration. But here is when voiceover narration is good and effective. It's when it's upending our expectations or giving us more than we would have without the narration. So in other words, if you have this scene, it still works. They're just sitting there, right? So we're seeing that they're not really talking to each other here. And then we see this is the story of Boy Meets Girl. It's a juxtaposition. We're counterpointing against what we're seeing in this scene, right? And we know that if it's 500 Days of Summer, 478 is towards the end, and there's a wedding ring. They're not really saying a word to each other, right? And we go back to day 1, and we're talking about who they are, and he wants a soulmate. I love, and a total misreading of the movie The Graduate. This gives him this endless romantic optimism. She, on the other hand, literally loves how she can cut something off and not feel anything. There's no two people who are less right for each other than these two. And so we're thinking at this point, as we read these pages, that this is going to be these two opposites coming together, right? So when we talk about, we're just about to see that first meeting, and it goes to blackness, and he says, you should know up front that this is not a love story. We've completely upended audience expectation, and it's a beautiful start to a story, because immediately we're thinking, who are these characters? What is this story we're now in for? And we're drawn in. We're hooked. The end here is a scene that sets up sort of this next little bit. So not really relevant for our purposes, but just as a way to bring us into a story, I think this is one of the most clever and innovative things. And while copying this first 3 full pages of a disclaimer, followed by something that maybe belies that disclaimer, followed by some definitive heartbreak attitude. If you tried to copy that, obviously it's not going to work because you're now a copycat. But finding something clever and creative that plays with the audience experience. Think about how in 3 sentences, on 3 separate pages, over 3 pages, even how it's positioned on the page. Look at the first page. It's there in sort of the standard where your disclaimer would be, or where your quote would be if you're going to do that. The next one sort of in the same spot. The next one is a little bit lower. It's an answer to the idea. It's really just in these 3 pages, we know we're dealing with writers who have a sense of what the experience of reading a screenplay story is all about. And then we jump into it, and oh yeah, not only are they introducing this clever idea, they're also giving us engaging writing and an engaging starting situation. And so we know, this is, I guess the larger point is that we know from the first 3 pages, we're probably in for a really great ride. Now, whether the writer ultimately delivers on that, whether the writer lives up to the promises, whether they fulfill or exceed the promises, is anybody's guess. And we'll only know that as we read the whole script. But in this case, I would argue they do. But that's what's going to keep the reader reading as they move through the story. If we know if the first 3 pages are set up powerfully and fluidly and in an engaging way, and I know I'm in for a good ride, then I'm gonna keep reading until that point at which that changes and it's no longer an engaging ride as we go along. The challenge is always the same when it comes to writing stories and writing screenplays, and that is when you're writing, it's all very clear in your head. It's all, you know what you're seeing, you know what you're wanting to put out there. You know the movie that you want everyone to make. The reader doesn't have any of that. And so we always have to be cognizant of what is the reader going to be thinking, feeling, experiencing with every single word we write. And what ideas is it going to put in their head? If we can understand what ideas it puts in their head, we can start to play with some of those ideas. We can start to bounce off of some of those ideas, and we can create that engaging reader experience. It's not even always about how effective your story is and does your story land. Often it's about how engaging is your writing. Are you creating an experience? If so, you might get pulled in to do a rewrite. You might get pulled in to write something on assignment. I love your writing. We can't make that story, but I want to see what you do with this idea. Here's some money. That's a perfectly acceptable possibility as well, is it not? Hopefully. Maybe that's not everyone's goal. Maybe your singular goal is to get this movie made. And if so, you need to make sure that this movie takes those people, the people who are going to be on your team, and turning that story into a movie. You need to make sure that you get them on your side and give them an experience that they're going to love and want to share. Make sense? Someone said this is definitely a good reminder to turn off continued in your software's options. Why is that? I'm not sure why. Daniel, is it Daniel? Let me have a quick look at where we see. Continued. Nope. Those are all accurate. Those are all correct. Continued. Nope, I disagree with that note, Daniel. You are definitely, when you have a character name and a line of dialogue, if there's a bit of action that breaks up the dialogue, we always want to have the character name followed by continued. So if it's not there, it's incorrect. And partly because if the pages get separated at any point, we don't know that it's part of a previous sentence. I had seen there was a trend a little while back. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing it too much these days, but there was a trend a while back, particularly in Australia, where they would have a line of character name, line of dialogue. They'd have a line of description, and then they just continue with dialogue. They wouldn't put the character name there. No, don't ever do that, because if when you're rewriting and you add more to this and it gets pushed down the page, and then that one little bit goes to the top of the next page, there's no character line on top, that page then gets separated somewhere along the way. It can be confusing. We want to always make sure that we keep those sort of formatting options in place. So the thing to understand is it doesn't matter if something looks clunky in your script. The reality is people who read scripts and who are going to be reviewing your projects and are going to be reviewing script after script after script, they're going to be reading tens, hundreds, thousands of them over time. And so we see through the formatting rules. So when I look at a script and I see, so just on the 500 Days of Summer script, I don't know if you noticed, but after interior and exterior, they didn't have the little period, full stop, dot. That my mind immediately went because that's the format, right? So it's not that you can't do it. Obviously, this script is fine. It's good. It's interesting to read. There's so many things. I said nothing but positive things about it, but I noticed that little thing, right? Because it goes against the norm, and because it goes against the norm, it's just something that pulls me out of it a little bit. So. This is a movie that went on to be. I love this movie, so it's if you haven't seen 500 Days of Summer, go run out and see it now. It's a really enjoyable film, but when you're writing a spec and you're trying to break through, and you're trying to get noticed, and you're trying to get in there, those formatting rules are there actually to help you. And even if something looks clunky, where you have the character name continued, line of dialogue, character name continued, continued, even though that may look clunky from a reading standpoint, as one who reads scripts all the time, you appreciate that, because you immediately can see this is a line of continuous dialogue through these little bits of action that are happening. Now, we can say that the bits of action maybe don't need to be there. We can clean it up in those kinds of ways. But assuming that this is refined and this is the way that it's intended to be and should be and is most effective, I'm going to want those things that may look clunky just from a purely observational standpoint. So that's why it's so important to really understand the quote unquote rules of screenwriting. It's not so much because you can't do it any other way. So many people resist the rules because they don't understand that those rules help us see different stories more clearly. If 10 different scripts are all formatted perfectly, then I'm going to be able to fully immerse into each of those different stories. If 6 of them are formatted kind of wrong, or making these mistakes or that mistakes, I'm not going to be able to immerse into all 6. I'm going to have a jagged experience. You know what I mean? From a reader standpoint, you as the writer really want the reader just like flow right into my story. If you're making me look at the formatting or what have you, then you're preventing me from having the full experience. And it may be a subtle thing. I'm picking on things to help you see that little things can make a really big difference. So hopefully that makes sense. Would I do that for a VO? Yes. So if a character says something in a voiceover, continued. So now, for example, narrator in 500 Days of Summer, they didn't put continued after it. You don't have to. It's a narrator. So a narrator they're not necessarily continuing on. Continued really is a continuation of the previous thing. So a narrator in principle is disconnected and connected at the same time. So you don't necessarily need the continued for the narrator. You can have the continued for the narrator. It's personal choice. Personally, I like it this way in 500 Days of Summer. But if they had put continued in there, that would have been perfectly fine for me as well. So some didn't see the horror specifically because I had already classified it as drama, Western romance on the title card. So in other words, because I had created a title card that explicitly pointed out the drama that you told me, Debbie, people didn't necessarily see the horror element that I saw when I read it. So it just goes to show you, even me setting something up a certain way is going to change the way people are perceiving it. That's why every little thing is challenging a lot of the times, because every little thing puts an idea in our head. Everything. Even sometimes things that are out of your control. What script the reader read before they read your script may have put certain ideas in their head that when they read your script, it's going to be biased by what they just read. Now, that's maybe not fair to you, but it's the reality, which is why the writing has to be super clear and always pulling us very clearly where it's trying to go, and taking the time to set things up and really paint that picture clearly. It's just important to always understand that the reader's mind is always going with lots of outside influences, and that's coloring, what movies they saw or what movie they think this is going to affect it. As a writer, you need to do your best to anticipate a lot of that stuff. One of the lines that gave a cue of romance was the cascade of blonde hair. I totally agree. It's one of those, the hair shampoo commercial, that's sort of what I got out of it. But it also is potentially a really nice character introduction. So I don't know that I would keep that personally. I don't want to tell you what to keep or what to get rid of, but I like those kind of. It's like what I was talking about with the chicken fried accent. It's like anything that uses more of our senses than just the visual is going to really help us get into the story more. It's going to make the story connect and feel more real to us. So I like those kinds of things. I want to have a character in a scene that is not mentioned until later. Patrick is asking, but want the reader audience to remember where they see him in the story. How could I write this? Okay, so if you have a character in a scene, so in other words, the character is in an early scene, but we're not specifically paying attention to him in that early scene. And then later, we need to remember that we saw him in that scene. And you need to remember that you saw him there. Is that the question? Is that where we're going to? Okay. So how can you write this? There's any number of ways. You could just highlight him. Maybe he does something that you're highlighting. You could call it out later and be like, you know, he was the guy with the trombone in the earlier scene. That's always going to be tricky. This actually highlights one of the challenges of screenwriting, is that when you watch a movie on screen, we have actor faces, and the human mind is literally a face recognition machine. That's what we do. We can see faces, we can remember faces, we can pick faces out of a crowd of faces, because that's what our brains do. So when we see an actor on screen, we see that face, we know instantly that was that character. If they're in the background over here, later on in the movie, we're going to remember them from that scene. If we had even the hint of a close-up over there, we'll remember it. In a script, they're words on a page, so we have to find some way to emulate that experience. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean you're going to have to highlight him? If you want to highlight him without making him stand out, right? So let's say you want him there, you want us to know he's there, but you don't want to call attention to him, because otherwise later on we're going to go, well, of course it was that guy. So we're going to, right? You're going to undercut the suspense, I think is what you're probably getting at. And so like if he's the guy the killer, we need to know that we saw him here, but we don't want to like be thinking, oh, the killer, right? So in a script, you can often cheat that a little bit. You can maybe have him do some action that seems integral or seems necessary for the scene. So to give you just a stray example off the top of my head, my apologies for the crudeness of the example, but let's say there's a hospital scene and the two characters are talking to each other, and the orderly comes in to change the bedpan or something and goes out, and then later on it turns out that the orderly was the killer, right? But we don't want to pay attention to the orderly too much, but we do need to see him there so that it makes sense later on. So what we could do is we could make sure that the thing that he's doing in that earlier scene is something that is integral to the narrative, right? So it's not like a slapped on, hey, there's an orderly changing the bedpan, right? Like it would be something like the patient is parched and really needs something. Please, doctor, get us some water. The orderly comes in and gives him a cup of water, and then they care. Oh, thank God! Oh, we saved. The heartbeat goes back to normal. We're not going to be paying attention to the orderly because we were paying attention to the water. Does it make sense? So that's the way to sort of hide how you're going to introduce someone early on that we need to know later on. We're not going to be thinking about that orderly because we were thinking about the water. So if you make it about that thing, that's how you can hide somebody in there. Hopefully that makes sense. That's one example. This is the kind of thing that you need to be thinking about when it comes to screenwriting in general, because you need to be thinking about misdirection as well. This is why I say it's important to always to be understanding or thinking through the audience experience. Because if you're really thinking through the audience experience, then things like misdirection or things like hiding a detail in plain sight become really about if I want to hide a detail in plain sight, how can I weave that into the story such that they're going to see it, but they're not going to be focusing on it. And I think it all comes back to you understanding what the reader is going to be thinking at this point. And the only way that happens is if you go out of your head, which knows all the details and wants to share the story, and put yourself into the reader's mind and go, what is this experience that I'm going through, right? And seeing it from that vantage point. I think it's a and this is not something you're going to do in 1 week. This is something that we literally spend a year doing in my system. It takes time to learn how to do this stuff. So understand that you can understand the principle, but actually doing it will take a little time and practice. But hopefully that's a little bit of a tip or an insight to help you weave some of that in there. All right. So without any further ado, thank you, Debbie. Debbie says super helpful. I say to you, Debbie, super helpful for sharing your pages with us and letting me pick them apart a little bit. Hope I wasn't too harsh. For those of you who have not yet sent in pages, please do. I think, Debbie, back me up on this if you agree, or call me out on it if you disagree. But I think there's something more profound that you get out of having your own pages reviewed. I think there's lots of lessons in all of them, obviously, but I think seeing someone read through your pages and give you sort of that insight from the other perspective can be empowering in a way that's really hard for me to put into words. So hopefully you guys will send in pages as well, so we can keep doing this. We're only going to be able to do this as long as you send in pages. So send in pages, thefeedbackloop.co/submit. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week. Thanks for watching. And thank you again to Debbie for being brave and sharing your work.